175 giant liberators streaking across the Mediterranean, and not an enemy plane in sight. Over the coast of Greece, across the rugged Balkan Mountains, past the Danube, the bombers roar upon their mission.
Cine știe unde centru în București, cât ar fi de mărginașe cartierele, parcă-s toate mici orașe și văzându-le. Cine știe pe unde centru în București. Dacă știi, mata răspunde când te întreabă unul unde centru în București. Eu de-o șcapă doar răspunde surâșnește în gar, eu sunt bucureștean. Dacă într-o zi mai întreba de unde sunt, răspund așa, eu sunt bucureștean. Orașul știu cum s-a făcut, cum a florit și a crescut, dar centrul vechi e azi mai nou pe unde e, să-ți spun mi-e greu. Cine știe?
Our past reminds us of who we are and who we have been. But when books are burnt and archives decay, with them are lost the lessons of our forefathers. We must remember the times of peace and the times of war. I am Nicholas Dimincescu. As an American of Romanian descent, I've set out to understand a critical period of Romania's past. To do so, I've searched archives to find stories known and forgotten. During the onset of the Second World War, Romania was pressured to supply its oil riches to the Axis war machine. In response, Allied forces would launch an air war to destroy the country's refineries. The tale of the Romanians and Americans involved reveals a fascinating relationship between two previous allies forced to face one another in combat. The rapid expansion of Nazi control over Europe forced Romania to take a dark turn. By 1939, King Carol II of Romania confronted fascist unrest and pressure from Hitler. He was soon forced to abdicate in favor of his 19-year-old son, Michael. The powers of the new king would be challenged by a pro-fascist General Ion Antonescu, who quickly gained dictatorial control over the military and the government. By the end of 1940, Romania had joined the Axis powers. Antonescu had a vision. He strategized using the support of the Axis to reclaim territory lost to the Russians. The military and air force officially joined the Axis invasion of the Soviet Union on November 23, 1940. Antonescu stated, "When it's a question of action against the Slavs, you can always count on Romania." Romanians now positioned on the Eastern Front numbered more than 650,000. Brașov, Romania. Here I began my exploration of Romania's aviation industry. Brașov was once a powerhouse of aircraft development and production. The IAR Aircraft Company was the beating heart of these efforts. In the 1920s and 30s, the company's innovators took leaps and bounds in developing new prototypes and designs. Soon they would have only one goal: to create fighters. An enormous abandoned industrial complex stands before me. Hidden inside is the location of the original IAR factory active during the war. From the factory's historic tower, I can see the aircraft hangar, runway, and machine shops. Historic photos of this site are coming to life right before my eyes. Nearby is the IAR hangar, a gem of Romania's aviation legacy. Inside, I can feel the history of this place all about. During the 1940s, men working in this very space would have been tightening bolts, welding metal frames, and testing experimental designs as they assembled and maintained Romania's new aircraft fleet. I can imagine the golden age of this space, the smell of gasoline and oil, tools, blueprints, sounds of hammering, the roar of engines, and the excited shouts of workers and pilots. In 1940, IAR's engineers made a breakthrough. They produced a fighter considered one of Europe's most well-armed and versatile. The IAR-80 was born. It was powered by an air-cooled 14-cylinder engine with a max speed of 540 kilometers per hour. While Romanian-built fighters gained credit, so did their pilots. A bold, young group of aces with 5 or more kills emerged, and by the end of the war, 126 would gain this title. Captain Alexandru Șerbenescu, 590 combat missions, 47 confirmed victories. Captain Constantin Canacazino, 608 combat missions, 56 confirmed victories. Captain Dan Vizanti, over 100 combat missions, 16 confirmed victories. One of the last men surviving today with memories of this elite group is General Jan Dobran. I was very lucky to meet him in Bucharest. Dobran is now 91, and when I listened to him, his mind was focused and his gaze sharp. His hands traced the flight of his plane as he spoke, and I knew he could still see the sky and feel the wind.
Actualul general Ion Dobran era locotenentul Ion Dobran și făcea parte din grupul Nouă Vânătoare. Grupul Nouă Vânătoare fusese constituit în februarie 1944 la Nicolaev, în Rusia, ales 32 de piloți din cei mai buni piloți contopiți din grupul 79 sub comanda capitanului Șerbenescu. La data intrării în război, 1 septembrie 1939, aviația română era una dintre cele mai bine pregătite. Aveam fabrica de la Brașov de construcție avioane și construisem IAR-ul 80 încă din anul 1938. Era un avion foarte bun. A urmat războiul din Rusia, în care piloții și-au perfecționat tehnicile de luptă, având și pierderi, dar având aviația superioară, avioane superioare. Această tehnică a fost utilă până în momentul în care am intrat în luptă cu americanii, în care proporția numerică a fost covârșitoare. Am avut piloți foarte buni, pentru că au avut timp ca să se formeze ca piloți, că numai în lupta aeriană te poți forma.
While Romania fought to hold the Eastern Front, the U.S. mobilized her forces to fight in Asia and Europe. Henry Ford's production facilities would help supply massive numbers of required war machines. Ford's Willow Run factory would prove second to none, as it created more airplanes than anywhere in the world. 24 hours a day, men and women alike churned out bombers with incredible efficiency. More B-24s were produced than any aircraft in history, over 18,000 in all. I've touched down in Wyoming, and for me this place is about as American as it gets. Here at the Casper Airport, I'm about to go on the ride of a lifetime. Parked on the runway is the only flying B-24J in the world. Soon I will be inside as it takes to the skies. I will fly aboard a B-24 Liberator, known as Witchcraft. She was recovered in India in 1969 and restored to near perfection with the help of wartime mechanics. Here's the defensive breakdown, This Liberator is protected by 4 turrets and 2 waist gunners, equipped with 50 caliber machine guns. Each of these mechanized turrets has a specific area of the plane to cover. The 2 waist gunners face open-air windows for maneuverable side cover fire. At high altitude, crew members would require oxygen and special suits to survive the freezing wind. These planes were technological masterpieces of their time and came to symbolize the air war over Romania. The time has come to awaken witchcraft. She exhales black smoke as 4 1,200 horsepower engines release a thundering roar. The sound echoes across the flat plains. The display sends shivers down my spine, and after reading tales of these mighty bombers, climbing aboard is a dream come true. We're picking up speed and my heart is pounding. There's an intense vibration as the wheels leave the ground. Wind is hitting me square in the face. I swing the 50 caliber machine gun capable of sending bullets ripping through the air. Airmen nicknamed this plane the Flying Coffin. When flak and fire tore through these claustrophobic spaces, there was nowhere to hide. Crews needed nerves of steel. While in flight, I get inside the ball turret. The gunner is sealed inside and lowered from the belly of the plane. Wedged between 2 guns, I peer out the turret's window. Later, a crew member opens the bomb bay doors, illuminating the narrow catwalk. I watch the landscape rush by. This ride has given me a full sensory understanding of a B-24 in flight. The tales of American bombers over Romania will now have new meaning. At the U.S. National Archive outside of Baltimore, I'm digging for material shot by the Americans during the air war against Romania. World War II historians have carefully indexed and cataloged declassified material from this period. In Benghazi, Libya during 1943, the British forced General Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps out of the country, and the US quickly established air bases. From here, it would now attempt to strike at Hitler's strategic oil supplies in Romania. Ploiești, Romania has a complex of 11 refineries, and a precision bombing raid could help impede the German war machine. The problem is, Germany and Romania will not let this happen without a fight. This is one of the most fortified areas in all of Europe. 237 88mm flak guns, as well as 50mm and 20mm weapons, were being manned by Germans and Romanians. Armaments lay hidden in fake haystacks and concrete emplacements. A lethal disguised flak train that could run on a long, straight, north-south route in line with the approaching aircraft was built. Some said it was the best defended Nazi-controlled site after Berlin. On the outskirts of Ploiești, we discovered with the help of a local helicopter pilot the location of an intact anti-aircraft nest and bunker. Firepower from these locations was essential to combat the Allied air assaults. Inside, a single crack of light illuminates a room that might have protected men and ammunition from incoming strikes. Officers address newly arrived pilots and crew members of the top-secret operation, dubbed Tidal Wave. When the word goes out, the men can't believe their ears. This will be a low-level raid. It will be incredibly dangerous and has never been attempted. On top of that, it's going to be the longest air raid in history, covering 2,700 miles round trip. Operation Tidal Wave is a go. Low-altitude training takes place for only 12 days against dummy targets. Over a short 2-week period, B-24 formations practice. The engines choke from the sand. All the while, powerful storms blow across the flat desert airstrip. Tents flap in the wind, and airmen bake in the heat. Young bomber crews decorate their Liberators with iconic graphics and names. Different bomber groups are assigned specific refinery targets. Scale models and flight lines are studied. 4 members of the 9th Combat Camera Unit will fly on board the bombers as passengers. Crew members will also help film from the waist windows. Fixed strike cameras are positioned in the Liberator's rear fuselage to take photographs for post-raid analysis. Major Robert Sternfels was a pilot of the 98th Bomber Group, led by Colonel John Kane. Better known by his men as Killer Kane, Sternfels flew his B-24 Sandman in the fateful tidal wave mission. Leaving Libya, hell awaited in Ploiești. A story he told me I'll never forget.
It was a beautiful day. The temperature was very good. And then when we got into Romania, and we followed a railroad track, and that is the place where we made our turn to the right. And when we made that turn, to our surprise, a train was going down that same track in the same direction, and they had box cars as well as flat cars. And on the flat cars were these guns. And they even had an 88 millimeter. They were very accurate. And also, when we made our turn, we were no longer in formation. We were in what they call trail. That means one after another. And they shot down a number of our planes. In fact, we lost approximately 42% of all our aircraft. And at that particular point, we must have lost at least 15 aircraft to the gunners. And I personally saw about 3 or 4 of our planes fall or crash land. And as I was going down that railroad track and looking ahead, I could see that our target was on fire. And it wasn't supposed to be on fire. It was supposed to be, we were supposed to be there first, but somebody had bombed it before we did. And as a result, the smoke was coming up, and you could see the fire coming up from the burning oil tanks, and it was terrible. I looked up, and in front of me was a cable. And the cable, you don't have cables when you're flying at that altitude unless there are barge balloons above you. So I banked the airplane just a little bit to the left, and the cable then slid down the right side of the airplane, and the propeller on the right side caught the cable and apparently broke it. So then I continued on, and we had dropped our bombs, and when you drop the bombs, the airplane raises up because you're losing that weight. So it comes up a little bit. So, and I felt that coming up, so obviously I knew the bombs had been dropped. And then after I left the smoke, right in front of me was 3 smokestacks. And these 3 smokestacks were higher than I was. So again, obviously you don't want to hit them. So I banked the airplane to the left again, and as if to kind of raise up the plane and the wing and go over the top of the smokestack. Well, it turns out after we saw a picture that somebody had taken that I did miss the smokestacks by 65 feet.
I'm on the trail of the massive destruction caused by tidal wave. At the Aquila refinery in Ploiești, fire raged 66 years ago right where I'm standing. Here, emergency crews struggled to contain the inferno. The Aquila grounds are now a jungle of concrete and brick defense walls, surrounded by dense overgrowth. These fortifications once protected petroleum from explosions and fires. Where they have fallen, you can see into the 3-foot-wide barriers. Seeing these remnants makes the violence and destructive power of these events even more real. To continue the exploration of these historic refineries, I analyzed the routes flown by the liberators on August 1st. The only way to understand the targets from the perspective of the bombers will be to fly at their altitude on the same path. Using military maps, documents, and satellite imagery, I spoke with Serene Pintia Dobrin to coordinate the aerial filming of 2 major refineries, as well as a crash site. We flew along the train tracks that guided the bombers to the refineries. The demolished oil fortifications of the Aquila refinery were perfectly visible. The pilot was next instructed to follow the path of the Sandman as closely as possible. Smokestacks from Astra Romana were dead ahead. As we swung around them, fires, smoke, sounds, and stories flashed across my mind. As the B-24s attempted daring escapes from Ploiești, the casualties and violent crashes continued. After attacking the Campina refinery, a series of photographs captured the crash of Eager Eagle. Pete Hughes, pilot and posthumous Medal of Honor recipient, desperately tries to land his damaged bomber on a riverbed. Eager Eagle catches fire, loses a wing, and cartwheels into the ground. Our pilot brought the helicopter right down to the altitude of the crash. From the ground, we photographed the site to compare it with that of the Romanian military crash photo. The returning B-24s landing in Benghazi brought with them the harrowing tales of lost friends and courage in combat. But due to navigation errors made by Colonel Keith Compton of the 376 Bomber Group, the mission's outcome remains controversial. At the Romanian National Film Archive, outside of Bucharest, I will have another chance to unearth footage from Romania's air war. Certain reels are unique to the collection here, so this is a vital stop. War historian Alexandru Arma has requested material filmed by the Romanian military of the tidal wave crash sites. Revealed is the Romanian ground-level perspective of bombing destruction and horrific crashes. There is no audio to these clips, except for the flickering sounds of the film advancing. Some frames are difficult to watch. Dead American airmen are recorded, and their young faces are clearly visible. Peasants in traditional clothing survey a downed liberator. Orthodox priests stand by a crash appearing to say a prayer for the dead. The clash of worlds is bizarre. This air war left a trail of carnage that films and photos have recorded. Destroying Hitler's access to Romanian oil was a job the Allies intended to finish. During 1944, the US raids over Romania continued, but from high altitude. B-24s and B-17s flew continuous missions, meeting German Luftwaffe and Romanian fighters head-on. South of Bucharest is the village of Galatan. The B-24 Sparta Wilkins, named after its pilots, crashed here in 1944. We've come to search for evidence of the crew members who were buried here. The village Orthodox priest took us to the church and we managed to find the names of the crew in the register. Airmen from this crash were honored with proper burials in a location of the cemetery reserved for priests. There were 2 survivors from the Sparta Wilkins crash, who were both waist gunners. William Jambrone was one of these gunners.
We were around 20,000 feet when we were ready to, I look out the window and out of the clouds, 12 o'clock high, I saw these German fighters come right towards us when I looked out the waist. And all of a sudden I heard, when they came out of the clouds, out of the sky, I just heard boom, 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 fire. And I saw the plane go right by me, and they were going so fast. Then we were hit, one of our engines was hit, and I see it was on fire. My parachute was hanging inside the door. I grabbed the cabin hatch, and I just pulled myself up, and the air, zoom, just knocked me right out. I hit the ground, very good, that's terrific. Farmers, with pitchforks and shovels came towards me, put my hand up. They didn't do anything. They were very good. Then they took me out where the plane crashed. They took it out, and then they were all pieces out of all the bodies. And that was it.
Jambrone was taken to a small town jail. We went to the location of the farmhouse jail to find it surprisingly unchanged. As we walked around the property, an incredible discovery was made. Romanian historian Dan Malinte spotted a large piece of metal in the farmhouse fence.
I think we look on a pieces from a B-24 from a crash place on the village Galatan.
It belonged to a crashed B-24 and quite possibly Sparta Wilkins. In my travels, I've met Romanians who experienced this air war from the ground. As civilians, farmers, and children, they watched the skies as men and machines came crashing down. I drove with Sarkis Geeknivorian, his son and family, to a town where he went at age 11 to escape the bombardments of an armaments plant outside of Bucharest. As we visited a village house used by his parents for safety, the neighbors recognized him. After over half a century apart, they shared their war memories.
He was 11 years old, he remembers.
Sarkis realized that he may have played with this man as a child.
They think they used to play together.
We drove to a pond where he remembered every detail of a bomber crash. His eyes lit up as he looked around the scene.
came right there. Right there, definitely. I remember. The plane was with the nose on the ground. The nose at, and one side the wing was out. Off, yeah. I can't believe after so many years I came over here. The pilot was,
Describe that.
dress. He was very calm, walking, looking at us, and with that pilot suit, sloppy on his with the pockets, a lot of pockets on him.
Was he hurt or was he able to
No,
walk?
he was not. He was walking perfectly, and behind him there was like a 3-4 gendarmes, Romanian police. He was not handcuffed, just walking freely. My childhood.
(1,100 American airmen who parachuted from their planes and survived crashes became prisoners of war in Romania. One of the locations they were taken to in Bucharest was St. Catherine's Girls' School. The building survived the raids and today is a theological institute. I took a trip to another POW camp near Brașov in Timișul de Jos. Archival photos show that the location included a small building and recreation field along a train track. We found the camp completely intact. As I walked up to the building's wall, I noticed period barbed wire and metal was still covering the basement windows. A lady inside knew the history of the camp and told me that her bedroom was once the dining room for the prisoners. In the basement, we were shown where an escape was attempted using silverware to dig under the foundation. Photos show the prisoners playing cards and volleyball. The stories from the Americans and Romanians at these camps paint a picture of guys just passing the time, sharing smiles, jokes, and games. Outside, we talked and shared drinks with the locals. I tried to imagine myself prisoner here 66 years ago and realized that an obscure relationship between our two countries has remained. Here in this strange setting, a clue about the war is revealed. These soldiers and their guards understood each other's situation and together waited for the war's outcome. Unlike the raids during tidal wave, high-altitude missions included fighter escorts, allowing for much greater defense. Escort fighters like the Mustang had superior maneuverability and attack capabilities. Standing next to this Razorback Model C is an honor since few still exist. While on the B-24 Witchcraft in Wyoming, we flew alongside a B-17 bomber as well as a P-51 Mustang. On June 6, 1944, across the European continent from the historic invasion of Normandy's shores, a 22-year-old P-51 Mustang pilot, Lieutenant Barry Davis, was about to engage in a dogfight over Romania. Davis flew with 325th Fighter Group, nicknamed the Checker Tails, stationed in Foggia, Italy. From there, he was sent to a temporary base in the recently liberated Soviet Ukraine. On this day, Davis would escort B-17 Flying Fortresses on a raid to the Romanian city of Galați.
4 of us were in the flight, Wayne Lowry leading, and as we were heading toward the target, the 4th member of the flight, flight of 4, the 4th member had to abort and go back. He had some engine trouble of some kind, so that left 3 of us on the fight. We got in a pretty good fight over the target area, and but we didn't do any good. I mean, we didn't shoot anything down. We did protect the bombers, but that was the extent of it. And when we finished up, the only two planes that we could see in the sky was my flight leader, Wayne Lowry, and me. The two of us. I don't know where all the airplanes went, but they were gone. So we flew side by side, heading back to the Ukraine, to our base in the Ukraine at Pyryatin. And I was on the right, he was on the left. We were protecting each other.
On the ground in Romania, alarms sounded signaling incoming enemy planes. Jan Dobran and his fellow pilots quickly ran to intercept the attack.
Și am văzut o formație inițial de 3 avioane din acestea Mustanguri. Era prima oară când ne întâlneam noi, grupul nou, cu ele și inițial am crezut că sunt avioane românești văzute de departe pentru că aveau botul vopsit în roșu, cum erau unele de la o escadrila noastră. Am trecut în sudul lor ca să am lumina soarelui, eu și americanii aici. M-am lămurit că sunt Mustanguri, 2 erau în față, unul era mult mai în spate. M-am hotărât totuși să atac. L-am luat în colimator pe cel din dreapta.
And Wayne saw a third airplane coming. I don't know if you ever noticed, but the P-51 and the Messerschmitt look very similar from a distance. So he thought it was Wayne Lowry, the third member of our flight, coming up to rejoin us, until that airplane started shooting at me. And evidently the first round hit my cockpit and knocked me out, because I don't know what happened there.
Câștigat mare viteză pe picajul pentru că eram de sus, așa. L-am avariat, am declarat mai târziu că l-am doborât, dar nu mi s-a putut confirma victoria pentru că n-a fost găsit pe teritoriul țării noastre.
So he messed it up real good. But Wayne Lowry, my flight leader, when he saw the Messerschmitt, as it turned out to be, start shooting, he broke into it and chased it down, and it ended up bellying in the ground. I mean, he chased it all the way to the ground, and it landed. I guess it got shot up in the process.
Lupta aeriană a continuat. Copilotul lui, Lovri, a fost singurul care s-a ținut foarte aproape de Messerschmittul meu. Pilotul ăsta, care era un pilot foarte bun american, a continuat lupta aeriană de la 7000 de metri în jos și înapoi în sus, în așa fel încât a reușit, prinzându-mă din spate, să mă lovească în radiatorul de glicol care răcea motorul avionului. Și a trebuit ca cu avionul meu 22 să aterizez forțat.
When I came to, my airplane was still flying right by itself. The canopy was gone, it had been blown away, and I was all filled full of little shell fragments and plexiglass fragments, things like that. And I couldn't see another airplane in the sky. I looked out, my right wing looked like Swiss cheese. He had mutilated my airplane. He'd really messed it up on that right wing. Dobran was a good shot. It was interesting. When I got back to the base in the Ukraine and landed, I had a little trouble getting my tail down. I couldn't figure out why. And then I noticed when I was taxiing to the tie-down spot, all the guys, the crew chiefs, were looking at me sort of strangely, and I couldn't figure what in the world is so strange about me. My right wing shot up, but that's not all that bad. I didn't have a canopy. But when I got out, he had literally shot off half of my rudder, elevators, the tail of that airplane.
On August 23, 1944, King Michael announced over the radio that Romania would cease fire. On that same day, he deposed and imprisoned Marshal Antonescu. Joining the Allies, Michael then gave orders to have the remainder of Romania's armies attack the Germans. During this period, the Air Force fought to protect Romania from the Luftwaffe, now furiously bombing the capital in retaliation. Caught in between were the American POWs. At the Foggia base in Italy, a remarkable moment occurred. Men on the ground stared wide-eyed as a lone Messerschmitt fighter prepared to land. On the side of this German-made aircraft was a crudely painted American flag, previous markings having been scraped away. As the plane taxied in, a startled group of airmen surrounded it, awaiting an explanation. Out of the cockpit jumped legendary pilot Konstantin Kanakazino, declaring that he had a surprise. Stuffed inside his Messerschmitt's fuselage was the highest-ranking American officer POW, Lieutenant Colonel James Gunn III. This incredible flight quickly triggered a secret mission to rescue the American POWs. A fleet of B-17s was ordered to carry out the rescue. On August 31st, they departed. With them would fly Kanakazino. He was given a checker-tail P-51 to pilot for the flight back to Romania. Wounded and healthy airmen were gathered and transported to the Popest airfield in Bucharest. 880 American prisoners lined up in groups of 20, ready to board the arriving B-17s. P-51 Red Tails, known as the Tuskegee Airmen, circled above, in case German fighters appeared. 10 days later, with 1,247 POWs eventually rescued, the American airlift was completed. The air war over Romania was over. It's a cold January day in Bucharest, Romania. A crowd is gathered inside the National Aviation Museum. I'm there with Romanian Air Force Chief of Staff, General Aurel Stanciu, U.S. Ambassador Mark Giedenstein, TV press, guests, and military personnel. We are waiting for two ace pilots who met in combat during the war. Today, 66 years later, Colonel Barry Davis and General Jan Dobran are about to meet for the first time face-to-face. There's an intense silence in the room as Colonel Davis walks in. Anticipation builds as he stops and General Dobran appears. The pilots embrace, and the moment is captured with photos and flashes. On camera, Barry explains that in combat, their objective was always to destroy planes, not pilots. The men stand in front of an IAR-80 as speeches are made and mementos are presented. As an outsider, I can only imagine what these two men must feel, these knights of the sky. I fly with the aces from Bucharest to Brașov inside a Puma helicopter prepared by the Romanian Air Force. Davis and Dobran are pensive as they look out over the snow-covered Ploiești refineries and Carpathian mountain ridgelines. At the Air Force Academy, they appear before young cadets. As the saga concludes, a moment in history has come full circle. The past has touched the present, and enemies have become friends. Engraved on a monument in the capital's Chichmiju Park are the words of Colonel John R. Killer Kane, a hero of the tidal wave mission. To the fallen of Romania, to you who fly on forever, I send that part of me which cannot be separated and is bound to you for all time. I send to you those of our hopes and dreams that never quite came true, the glorious strength and tragic illusions of our young manhood. All these that were and perhaps would have been, I leave in your care, out there in the blue.
rose. Il me dit des mots d'amour, des mots de tous les jours, et ça me fait quelque chose. Il est entré dans mon cœur une part de bonheur dont je connais la cause. C'est lui pour moi, moi pour lui dans la vie. Il me l'a dit, l'a juré pour la vie. Et dès que je l'aperçois, alors je sens en moi mon cœur qui bat. Merci. Mulțumim.